Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about the War Within beta, covering a bunch of classes, and one of the ones that keep coming back on this channel has been the class of Death Knight. Though, whenever we talk about Death Knight, we're primarily focusing on either Blood or Unholy, where Frost has gotten a few changes for the beta builds, but not nearly as much up until this week. This week, they didn't really see a restructure or a reformation or a massive adjustment, but rather a revamp to their damage profile to be less rampy and more immediate in bursts, where they no longer can build up their strength inside of Pillar of Frost windows into incredible heights, but the rest of their damage kit has been amped by some like 23%. Today's video, I wanted to take a close look at the Frost Death Knight, try some of the different builds out there between Obliteration and the Breath build, and see how this new adjustment to their damage profile could impact them going forward in a bit more of a detailed discussion. As always, if you guys enjoy regular class updates for the War Within beta, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. For me, the Frost Death Knight has always been the type of playstyle that's fairly easy to come back to after playing other playstyles. I've always had the simplicity of the spec and just how easy it is to get reacclimated back. And the next expansion is actually even granting Death Knights a little bit more variety in terms of playstyle. You'll still primarily be going for a two-handed Obliterate spam build or a dual-wieldy, probably Breathless and Dragosa style build, but there's a bit more flexibility in how you end up kind of customizing your playstyle outside of those major cooldowns. As for this week's update specifically, we got a fairly big damage rework for Death Knights. This isn't necessarily a rework of the spec itself. For the most part, you're playing the same exact abilities as you did in the past, but the damage profile is going to be a little bit different. Starting with Pillar of Frost, which no longer has a ramp up element. Right now, Pillar of Frost just simply increases your strength by 25% while it is active. Previously, it used to be where Pillar of Frost, as you spend runes, would actually increase your strength with every rune spent. So it has this like a ramp up element, but now it's a bit more static. However, the rest of your damage kit has saw a fairly sizable increase from abilities such as Frost Strike, to Obliterate, Howling Blast, your Frost Fever Dot, Remorseless Winter, Glacial Advance, Chill Streak, and Inexorable Assault, as well as Breathless and Dragosa, all got buffed by 25%. This overall allows Death Knights, for Frost in particular, to be instantly effective as soon as you press your major cooldowns. There isn't any more ramp up time for you to build up to your strength during Pillar, where then you want to sink in all of the strongest abilities towards the very last few globals, which can sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable depending on your haste values or if you're on bloodless windows, because then it's all about trying to use those as the very last end ability. So now you can kind of use those abilities instantly as soon as you pop Pillar, which will hopefully lead to a little bit more consistency when it comes to your burst. The buff to basic combat abilities also should make him a little bit more effective outside of your major cooldown window, and hopefully make the spec feel a little bit less of a effective inside of cooldowns, kind of mediocre outside of cooldowns. So hopefully your sustained damage overall for when it comes to raids and dungeons, and especially in PvP, should feel a little bit more impactful. But this change also does allow you to play a little bit better with some of those basic combat ability buffs with the Rite of the Apocalypse and the Deathbringer, as they actually have certain gameplay elements inside of them that amplify some of your basic combat abilities. With the Deathbringer hero spec, there's a talent called Wither Away, where Frost Fever deals its damage in half the duration, and the second Frost Scythe of the Exterminate ability as part of the Deathbringer playstyle also applies Frost Fever to targets. This is actually quite noticeable when playing around a mastery-heavy Breathless and Dragosa build, where Frost Fever actually ended up being a significant portion of my damage, and it gives you a bit more of this damage over time component as a Frost Death Knight, or a bit more importance into diseases, where previously that importance wasn't nearly as heavy. As for the Rite of the Apocalypse, you summon a bunch of different riders with different effects depending on what they are. Morgan, for example, casts Death and Decay all around his location, which grants you the ability to cleave with Death and Decay as a two-handed Frost Death Knight, for example. And if you get in a couple of those Killer Machine Obliterates outside of your burst windows, those actually can feel quite strong and can give you quite a bit of overall sustained damage in AoE content. Or things such as White Mane, who puts a Shadow Frost Dot on the enemy and every single cast of Obliterate could actually empower that dot further, so spamming Obliterates inside of the window feels a bit better, and also Trollbane that gives you targets to focus, which opens up the ability for you to realize some of those basic combat abilities with the Rider. And then we have certain talents such as things such as Shattering Blade, which gives you that Shattering Frost gameplay, which can give you this AoE tap targeting, kind of seeing anybody who has 5 stacks of Razor Ice on them, shattering that Razor Ice, getting the Shatter Frost combo, which gives you a bit more of a like tap targeting around having to retarget multiple enemies at once, but it gives you something to do while your cooldowns are coming back online. So this buff to some of your basic combat abilities opens them up just a little bit more for a more sustaining based gameplay. I think that will still be very cooldown heavy, but it is nice having your abilities do a significant amount of damage outside of your major cooldowns also. As for some of the other talents, we've seen things such as Frost Scythe getting amped by 5%, Frostbound's Fury amped by 10%, and Icy Death Torrent ability, which is going to be this one here, where auto attacks, critical strikes have a chance to send out a sleet of ice. That's been buffed up by 100%. Again, more ways for you to add a little bit more consistency for your basic combat abilities. Besides this, Frost Death Knights have also seen a couple of adjustments when it comes to a handful of other talents that play around Pillar of Frost windows. For example, such as Enduring Strength has been lowered from 25% down to 15%. Murderous Efficiency has also been kind of reduced from 50% chance to refund a rune down to a 25% chance. As well as Ice Cap, to make sure the Pillar of Frost is a bit more consistent, has been adjusted from an effect where certain abilities, critical strikes, would help reduce the cooldown of Pillar of Frost window. Instead, they simply reduce the cooldown of Pillar of Frost by 15 seconds. This does a couple of things. For me, I think this makes Pillar of Frost a little bit more consistent. No matter the amount of critical strike or haste or how many crits you gain on your Death Knight, where you could reduce the cooldown of your Pillar of Frost, which was somewhat stat reliant, but now you just get like a flat amount of reduction with Pillar of Frost, which allows you to chain Pillar of Frost together with your Frostbound's Fury more consistently, as well as to pull it together with other cooldowns as well. So you no longer have to use abilities to bring it down and then time it together. Now you could just simply send those abilities at once without really having to do too much micromanagement. And technically, previously, before this change, you could get Pillar of Frost windows to be a little bit higher and get better uptime of Pillar of Frost. If, let's say, you had a bunch of stats and then during your Bloodlust windows, you could chain a bunch of critical strikes together, really reduces cooldown by quite a bit. So this does remove some of those possibilities for you to be able to chain Pillar of Frost and technically have a slightly longer duration, but the cooldown now is in a much healthier state where you can synergize with the rest of your Death Knight toolkit, which is probably healthier for Frost Death Knights, no matter what kind of stats you end up investing into, as the stat priority is slightly different between like two-hander or dual-wield builds. As for the actual gameplay of the Frost Death Knight, it doesn't feel any different, or at least not too different, but you did notice a couple of things. Cooldown consistency is very, very noticeable. The fact that they are up every 45 seconds, I think lines up pretty well. So if, let's say, you're doing a raid fight and there's an opportunity for you to have a 45-second window every 45 seconds, if you can maximize that burst, that is going to be awesome. In dungeons, it's a little bit more floaty. It all depends how much pulling your group is going to do, but that there felt really, really good when it comes to actual dungeon testing. And being able to play around with different builds, whether you play in the Breathless Zaragoza build or the two-handed Obliteration build, and trying out a couple of talents has been actually quite fun. And being able to have those abilities do a bit more damage outside of cooldowns, I feel it does give you a little bit more importance to how you end up spending your runes, building your runic power, and the general rotational elements of a Frost Death Knight outside of CDs. There is a little bit more emphasis on that type of gameplay as well. Besides this, I also got to try out a couple of different builds with Rider of the Apocalypse and Deathbringer, and like I mentioned before, the Wither Away playstyle actually is pretty good. And even just taking a look at Deathbringer in general, this isn't necessarily a change that happened recently, but I actually think they did some stuff with the updated Death Reaper's Mark ability or some aspects of the hero talent in general, and Deathbringer actually hits really hard. It synergizes super well with the Frost Death Knight. I saw a lot of Death Knights talking about how they were going to probably run Rider of the Apocalypse as Frost, but don't discount Deathbringer completely. It's quite strong. The damage of your Reaper's Mark basically could do more than a Warrior's Demolish, which previously was the strongest ability in a single global. But if you could build up a big Reaper's Mark, have it pop off at the end, and if it crits in particular, it can do a significant amount of damage. And if you could chain those back to back on multiple targets, That's quite a lot of overall single target as well as AoE value for this playstyle specifically. Although if you do prefer the more obliteration focused build, Ride of the Apocalypse ended up working really well, especially without Morgaine Death and Decay in AoE content. Just being able to synergize that kind of a combo every single time makes managing Death and Decay as a Frost Death Knight so much easier. And with your cooldowns being a bit more consistent, I found this one actually really good to play around with if you're more of the cooldown focused type of Death Knight. Or rather, I guess if you want to be a minute CD focused DK or the 2-minute CD focused DK, because I feel like either one of these abilities synergizes with either of the two playstyles right now. But with that being said, Frost Death Knight damage buff I think it feels pretty good at the end of the day. We don't really know how it's going to synergize and how it's going to perform when it comes to end game content. We don't have any of the end game testing or that many sims that I've been able to find. And I think this change to the damage profile for Frost Death Knight makes him a little bit more stand out from Unholy Death Knight, which has a little bit more of these natural rampy elements as you summon up the entire army of the undead, as you build up the damage with your gargoyle, as you build and build and build for a big crescendo burst. Frost Death Knight is a bit more snappy now. You pop cooldowns, pop all of your strongest abilities immediately, and you see that instant effect as soon as you press any of your major cooldowns. And I think that fits the Frost Death Knight playstyle pretty well. Historically, Frost Death Knight has always been the burstier of the two specs that could just kind of instantly go as soon as you need the damage on demand, where Unholy had always a little bit more of a setup but more of a smoother sustained playstyle. Frost has been mostly focused on burst, and I feel like this change to the way that the Pillar of Frost works, just instantaneous burst, unleash everything, throw the strongest abilities out immediately, I think ends up working for Frost pretty well, but hopefully tuning will end up keeping the spec relevant. But with that being said, I'm gonna stop yapping about Death Knight. Who cares about what I think about this playstyle? I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below. I haven't seen that many Frost Death Knights running around. A lot of the times it is Unholy Death Knight, just because Sinlean Unholy has been incredible. If you like the dot-based gameplay with not as many undeads, but just that pure damage over time disease combo that you can just extend, consume, reapply again, has been very, very strong. But I have seen a handful of Frost Death Knights here and there, and when I do see them, they always seem to put out quite a competitive bit of damage. And I want to hear your thoughts down below. What are your thoughts on the Frost Death Knight so far? Do you like this change where they're more immediate for consistent burst change adjustment with Pillar of Frost and amping all of their abilities by what, 23% on average or something? Or would you like him to actually stay as they were, kind of have this ramp up playstyle instead, so you can kind of achieve some of the bigger bursts as you build it and build it and build it? Which one of those two playstyles would be your preference? Let me know in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.